Where to begin? So much has happened this week. We have so little time. I would love to talk a lot more about this issue, but we only have so much time. As I said, this is about who is going to win the Democrat nomination. But there has been a situation this week with Ilhan Omar that I think we have to explain a little bit. Ilhan Omar is a congresswoman from Minnesota. She is originally from Somalia and she moved here when she was 14 and she's about 40 now. And this past week she made some comments that some people view as anti Semitic. Now, I'm not going to say that she is anti Semitic or that they were intended to be anti Semitic because I can't read minds. And I think it's really important to acknowledge what we know and what we're kind of only assuming, because when we start to think that we read people's minds and we know what they meant, that's where you can start to delude yourself and get an opinion that is completely off kilter with reality. So we're only going to say that they were viewed as anti-Semitic, and some people in the Democrat Party were very concerned by this. So a resolution was drafted, a resolution against anti-Semitism, but that was directed against Ilhan Omar. But some of the newer congressmen that are kind of the liberal upstarts, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, fought that resolution. It got watered down. It eventually ended up being a general resolution against hate instead of a resolution against Omar particularly. But they did get that through and passed it. And pretty much all of the candidates have responded to this in one way and another. And there's a key difference between how they reacted that I think is critical to note here. So I'm going to just read a couple of statements here for you guys. Here is Sanders. Anti-Semitism is a hateful and dangerous ideology which must be vigorously opposed in the United States and around the world. We must not, however, equate anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of the right-wing Netanyahu government in Israel. Rather, we must develop an even-handed Middle East policy which brings Israelis and Palestinians together for a lasting peace. What I fear is going on in the House now is an effort to target Congresswoman Omar as a way of stifling that debate. That's wrong. So he was very much talking about the Israeli government itself and the issue that's kind of more behind the comments that Omar made. And he very rigorously supported her in that statement, I felt. All right. But you'll notice there's also a little bit of changing the subject. You'll notice this in all of them where they say, well, there's also, anti-Islamic sentiment out there as well that we need to be concerned about, which is true, but kind of besides the point. Anyways, here is what Kamala Harris said, the controversial comment that she made. I am concerned that the spotlight being put on Congresswoman Omar may put her at risk, right? A lot of people in the right were kind of excoriating her for that comment. Note, though, that she didn't really, it wasn't as strong of an endorsement or support of Omar herself, right? Gillibrand, those with critical views of Israel, such as Congresswoman Omar, should be able to express their views without employing anti-Semitic tropes about money or influence, just as those critical of Congresswoman Omar should not be using Islamophobic language and imagery that incites violence, such as what we saw in West Virginia. And Cory Booker said, I found what she said was disturbing. I stand against anti-Semitism and racism and bigotry. You also see bigotry and anti-Islamic sentiment being wrapped around her criticism. Okay, so just to kind of look about this, when you get this sort of a thing, you want to say something that makes everybody feel good, right? And that might often mean changing the subject. So focusing on that there is anti-Islamic bigotry out there is one way that you do that. And I think that is, because number one, they're right. There is absolutely a lot of anti-Islamic bigotry out there. And that's why I say we don't know what Ilhan Omar is saying. And I see a lot of discussion on the right that seems to imply that they do. Okay, but it is a changing the subject. We must note that it is changing the subject. All right. That's the strategy. That's why we want to note that. That's the strategy. But you notice that Bernie Sanders was the only one that said something about the Israeli government itself and the issue that Ilhan Omar is actually concerned about. Okay, so when you look at who is courting that particular constituency, Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the young upstart activist liberal wing of the party, it is absolutely without question Bernie Sanders. In fact, Cory Booker, who I kind of thought was maybe in that wing as well, straight up said that what she said was disturbing, right? That is an interesting contrast, right? So that's kind of the way that I see that particular situation. Anyways, I think this whole situation is very, very bad for the Democrat Party. I don't want to spend too much time on it, only to say that we got to be very careful about these sorts of things, because this is where things can get really dangerous, right? When we start to generate opinions that are based on mind reading and what we think somebody believes. And I think that everybody should just kind of chill out a little bit, because I'm really worried that something bad could happen, and we don't want that. All right? So I hope that I treated this subject with the sensitivity that it deserves, because I really think that it is one that deserves sensitivity. So, moving on, there's a couple of other things that happened this week that I think are important to note. First of all, I have some poll numbers from Morning Consult that I think are important. They are down in the video description. The thing that's interesting about these is that so far it is mostly just name recognition, but Biden is up top and followed by Bernie Sanders. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was that Bernie Sanders was leading even Kamala Harris in some of the demographics that we would expect Kamala Harris to be ahead in. And so we're finding that name recognition is something that really, really matters, right? So we just want to note that, keep that in mind, all right? Next, there was a controversy with Kamala Harris again about flip-flopping, this time on prostitution, because she's kind of been endorsing prostitution, and actually a couple of the candidates have been talking about that. That's a thing on the left right now. But she, in the past, was against prostitution. And so here's what she said in 2008. We want to have a society that protects the vulnerable and does not allow people to be exploited. Decriminalizing prostitution is simply not going to achieve that. Okay? So this is an attack. I think this is a real vulnerability for Kamala Harris. This is the second or third time that we've seen this. And so I think that I would keep that in mind, especially since if you're flip-flopping and you're like, if Bernie Sanders flip-flopped on something, they're probably going to give him a pass, because I think that his ideological purity is unquestionable. But when you come to, like, the further right you go, the more flip-flopping that you've done, the more concerned that the base becomes about it. All right, so this is a real vulnerability for Kamala Harris. Next, Elizabeth Warren, so she made a proposal to break up the big tech companies like Facebook and Google. Here's what she said: today's big tech companies have too much power over our economy, our society, and our democracy. They've bulldozed competition, used our private information for profit, and tilted the playing field against everyone else. And in the process, they have hurt small businesses and stifled innovation. I think that this is an interesting proposal, because I think a lot of people in America believe that tech companies have too much power. I know that we talk about constantly in my morning streams how the algorithms have too much power. So I think this is something that's going to resonate with a lot of people, especially people on the left. And even though Warren continues to poll very, very poorly, she does have some policy chops and a lot of ideas that I think once we get into the debate stage of the primary could really help her out. So let's not count her out, right? Also, Beto. So Beto, there was a documentary about the Beto campaign. A lot of people from the right wing were really pointing this out in the article. He was dropping F-bombs and complaining and just generally paints him in a bad light at certain points, because a campaign is stressful. It's absolutely stressful. In fact, he says, I know I was a giant asshole to be around sometimes. O'Rourke acknowledges at one point in the documentary to his top aides, who do not dispute him on that point. Okay, so it'll be interesting to see if these get used in attack ads, but the right has definitely latched onto this, and we'll see if it ends up mattering or not. But that does take Beto down a little notch in my mind. personally, if I was running a campaign, I wouldn't let people film me because campaigns are stressful. I've worked on campaigns, they're stressful. No matter how great of a candidate are, you're going to see people in their worst light. So, you know, it is what it is. He hasn't announced yet. We still don't know if he's going to announce. Maybe my bet turns out to be correct and he doesn't run. And the longer on it goes, of course, the more uncertain it becomes. But he hasn't announced. Neither has Biden. Although it sounds like Biden is like almost 99.9% going to jump in. All right. One last thing I want to highlight for you guys is Hickenlooper raises $1 million in 24 hours. So he is a governor from Colorado. California, of course. If it was a governor from California, everyone would be like, hey, nope. No, but California, okay, and 1 million, so that he does have some chops. He's not very high in the polling, so I'm not going to put him on the board. There's actually a couple of people that really don't deserve to be on the board here anymore, but he might matter in the future, so that's just one that I want to keep an eye on. All right, so that is everything that we have this week. Of course, there's tons of things happening, but you know, I want you to get back to your day. Thank you for watching. I hope that we were able to treat the issues that we're talking about today with the appropriate sensitivity. Again, these are things that can be really bad, so I would please be aware and sensitive and try and think about what you're saying and what the impact that this can have on other people. All right. So hopefully I will see you guys during my morning streaming every morning from about 8:15 to 10:30 Eastern time every morning, every market day. And in the meantime, stay profitable, friends.